Two conductivity measurements. I've got two pH measurements. I've got DO and oxidation reduction potential. What's a mixture of brown and yellow called?
I think the public just hasn't been paying attention to water quality issues at the seashore, and suddenly we all are. And I think we're waking both the park up and the water quality board up. So I'm putting together a supplemental letter to send to the Park Service about accountability for all this water pollution we're seeing out there, and there's very little information to the public. Obviously, there's a problem. I mean, when we go out to Point Reyes, we see piles of manure, broken down fences barely containing herds of cattle. So what's really going on here? So this is kind of what I talked about in our first panel discussion, but I've taken some screenshots of some of the websites, me trying to navigate through this. And like I said previously, there are two levels. There's the federal Environmental Protection Agency level, which applies to California water bodies. I could probably send this PowerPoint as a PDF so that you can all see these URLs. This is epa.gov. They have a really nice portal called How's My Waterway, where they have a map and you can zero in on, say, Point Reyes National Seashore and see what the water pollution for that water body is. So I played around with this a little bit. This is a screenshot of Olema Creek. Here's Tamales Bay. Lagunitas Creek goes like this. And the red indicates impairment. And this means it's polluted in some way, you know, either fecal coliform or sediment or mercury, who knows? So in red, and here's Nicasio Reservoir, all these are impaired water bodies. And you can click on and find out some information, and these were actually surprisingly not helpful. It said, okay, polluted. You open the technical report and it said very, very little. So there are all these, like no permits in this area. We're not really doing anything. This was actually not very helpful website, except the map did show things. Now, for some reason, there's a giant blank when you zero in on Drake's Estero, except for Home Ranch Creek is said to be impaired. So you click on that, and then it says no pollution information available. So there seems to be gigantic gaps with the EPA water pollution site. So that's troubling in itself. Okay, so moving on, here's a dairy cow on El Ranch Road in Point Reyes National Seashore. So then we go to the state California Water Board's website, which theoretically should be a higher standard than EPA. And you kind of, it's like a vast morass of links and things that's very difficult to figure out. But what I did find out is the water pollution levels in Point Reyes National Seashore and other places are actually under permits through the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, which is a state law that says you should not impair the environment, such as water quality. It's actually very detailed. You shouldn't impair aesthetic visual resources or biological resources. There's quite a list. So diving into this was sort of interesting to me. The lead agency to enforce CEQA is the State Water Board, and a cooperating agency would be the National Park Service at Point Reyes. So you go into the depths of the Water Board website, and it seems to be pretty clear that Point Reyes National Seashore is part of the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board, Region 2. So they should have all the answers, right? So I went into some of their pages here, and they do admit that Tamales Bay, Lagunitas Creek, and Olima Creek in Point Reyes National Seashore are impaired. The water quality is impaired, pathogens, and then they even say livestock grazing operations are identified as a source of the pathogens. So they admit it. And Jim Coda put something similar in his letter. I mean, they admit everything. So you think, okay, well, hopefully that will make Point Reyes National Seashore accountable. Here's, by the way, a picture I took is actually a video clip of a tributary of Olima Creek. And this is one of the worst impaired streams that's supposed to be part of the federally listed coho salmon and steelhead trout, but it's in a beef ranch, and the beef cows were constantly crossing this creek, and this is horrendous bank destabilization and erosion. The water quality is turbid, cloudy with sediment. This is the last thing you want for salmon and trout. This was January 2020. So you go in and you hope that there will be a fine or something for doing that, especially on a park, but no. The San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board issues waivers to these beef and dairy ranches. I guess the beef ranches too. I haven't actually looked at that as well, but all these ranches in the Tamales Bay watershed get waivers. So what does that mean? So I found the actual waiver for the Tamales Bay watershed as you search through this giant website, and it just says, well, they will adopt a conditional waiver for waste discharge requirements for these polluting grazing operations and ranches. And we're just going to adopt the old 2008 waiver. And we're not even going to update it. I mean, they're adopting something that's 10 or more years old and just rubber stamping it to go forward. Now under CEQA, you should identify whether something has a significant impact, and I'm sure Jim could explain this much more, but something that has a significant impact is harms salmon, or is a visual intrusion on the aesthetics of the landscape, or harms rare plants or natural plant communities. Something that significantly impacts something shouldn't be done, or it should be mitigated, but ideally it should be the thing that makes the impact, such as cattle grazing, should be avoided. Now, when I looked at this waiver, the signing officer, 2008, whoever this is for the state, said, I find that this proposed, the project means all the grazing on Point Reyes National Seashore and Tamales Bay watershed could not have a significant effect on the environment, and therefore a negative declaration will be prepared. A negative declaration in CEQA talk means go ahead and do the pollution, have significant effects on the environment, and we'll just make sure it's mitigated and controlled. So I was surprised to see that. So what are they supposed to do, the ranches and the Park Service, to earn this mitigated negative declaration under CEQA law, our state California law, and then get these waivers? They're supposed to exclude cattle from riparian areas and wetlands with fences. They're supposed to harden water crossings. That means perhaps make a bridge for cattle so the cattle aren't just stomping in the muddy water. If cattle are impacting a spring or a stream and drinking water, you want to pipe water to an artificial trough away from the stream or spring. Grassed filter strips. These are like rolls of hay that try to control erosion. And remember that, because I have a picture of what they're trying to do there that didn't work. Soil shaping for new linear wetlands. I actually don't know what that means. I'll have to look into that. Reduce year-long grazing, which the park isn't doing. So here's some pictures of what's going on. I think, Jim, you took this photo. And just see if this matches. These are all recent photos. Does this match what's actually supposed to be done to mitigate this and earn their waiver? Jim took this photo recently. This is actually a cow in a sedge wetland. This is a wetland, and I don't know, this fence seems to be cutting right through it. So there's water or damp ground here. This would biologically be classified as a wetland, yet you have cattle grazing here. Jocelyn Knight took these photos a couple of days ago. This is Drake's Estero Beach with cow tracks, cow manure in the water. I can't see how that's good. I took this picture at Home Ranch of severe erosion and head cut. I mean, this is sediment going into Home Ranch and then into Drake's Estero. These are beef cows. This is an anonymous photographer who took a picture on, this is actually not the Tamales Bay watershed, but I just am including pictures of the Pacific Drainage 2 on Point Reyes National Seashore. This is fields of liquefied dairy manure. Might be L Ranch. Here's a photo I took of a severely impaired pond or some sort of water feature that has so much nutrient and manure input from cow grazing that it has a film of aquatic plants covering it. And when you see this, it's actually called eutrophication. There's so much fertilizer in the water that it's not clear. It's murky and full of this green film of plants. Here's one of the ranches facing the Pacific Ocean. This looks to me on the bottom, you see this green looks to me like a drainage wetland riparian area, but you have herds of dairy cows, you have fields overgrazed, you have weeds, you have silage fields where they grow more for the cows. Here, Skylar Thomas took this picture of severe trailing and erosion. He took this picture of cows just in the water at Point Reyes National Seashore. Here's a picture of a confined animal feeding operation on the El Ranch Road. I mean, this during a winter storm, all of this washes into drainages and into in this case, the Pacific Ocean. This is winter, not much better in the summer. They truck in alfalfa by the ton to feed the hungry dairy cows. And finally, here's a picture of the grass filter strips, which are like hay embedded in a burlap mesh. This is that tributary of Olema Creek in 2018. The cows were still accessing this, and they were trying to stop the erosion that was cutting this bank down and literally choking salmon and steelhead trout waters. Doesn't seem to be working very well here. So another last thing I found that I thought was sort of interesting was a checklist form for assessing grazing operations in the Tomales Bay watershed. This is to be filled out by the ranch owner and then handed to the water boards, perhaps filed with the Park Service. And it just goes through things like, do you see bare soil in your pastures? Yes or no? Are there gullies or headcuts in your pastures? Yes or no? And it even has an aesthetics section. Does your ranch or cows have a substantial adverse effect on a scenic vista? I mean, it just has pages and pages of a questionnaire to the ranchers. So my idea would be why don't we as citizens and park visitors fill out this questionnaire and send our own versions to the park and to the water board? I mean, I can develop a little guide about how to do it, but I think it's not working to have the ranchers self-monitor because they're not apparently recording all these horrendous violations of their waiver. So I'm going to get a little kit together and I'll share it with Diane, but that's kind of an action item I had that could maybe fact check the ranchers and say, it's not working, the water boards, it's not working to just have ranchers fill out forms and self-monitor. So that's my presentation.
Shark Stewards is part of the Earth Island Institute, founded by David Brower. Our headquarters are across from UC Berkeley, where I did my graduate work and actually worked for the integrative biology department for 10 years before venturing off and starting a nonprofit to save sharks from overfishing in the shark fin trade and to protect critical marine habitat, which is our mission. And we're advocates. I lived in West Marin for many years, 10 years at least, San Geronimo Valley, also Fairfax. I worked with Turtle Island for about a year and a half, kind of getting their shark program going with Todd Steiner. And I encourage Spawn and Todd to get involved with this issue if he's not already. So I've been around for a long time, but I'm also an ocean voyager across most oceans, under sail on expeditions, making films, studying sharks, and writing, and applying most of that work towards conservation. So our mission is really to get involved with policy, but through activism, through action, and through directing change through legislation. So I just want to talk a little bit about the diversity of sharks, because that's what I do. And we're working in education here in the Bay Area, and every year, we do a series of events called Sharktoberfest, and it's a big celebration of white sharks when they return from a incredible migration around 2,500 miles offshore, where most of them are now, in what's called the White Shark Cafe. And they come back during the fall months, what we call Sharktober, when we see peak interactions with humans and observations. And they're here to feed off of those delicious pinnipeds that are also breeding and feeding in our National Marine Sanctuary and National Seashore. So typically we think of sharks, we think of these characters. They're very beautiful and smiley, powerful fish. But we have an incredible amount of diversity outside the San Francisco Bay and inside the San Francisco Bay and the estuaries associated with Drake's Bay. Outside, we have these pelagic species like threshers and blue sharks and salmon sharks. And we also have many benthic species like angel sharks that love estuaries to pup. Many of these sharks give live birth, like this shark, the spiny dogfish. This shark is famous in that she has one of the most longest gestation periods of any vertebrate. 3 years, moms. How would you like that?
Oh my God.
Be pregnant for 3 years. So these are a deeper water shark, but these come into the estuaries and pup as well. And then the flat sharks are the most speciose. So the rays, bat rays, of course, you see them in Tomales Bay when you're kayaking along. So right about this time of year, the females are coming in to gestate many species, including the hound sharks, like the leopard sharks, the smooth hounds, and the bat rays. And so these pregnant moms are coming in, they're gestating, and they're coming into the shallows away from their predators, but also to nurture their young, and then they give live birth. So this is a very important time for many species of elasmobranchs, which is the group that contains sharks, skates, and rays. And then there's an outside group called chimera or ghostfish that live off the continental shelf in deeper waters. But we have these guitar fish because they are played in B flat. Get it? We have another species of guitarfish, the thornback guitarfish, which is actually more like a ray genetically. And then we have the electric rays, the skates that come into the bay. I'm not certain about Tomales Bay. So one of the things I've been interested in for a long time after studying elasmobranchs in the bay and looking at populations, movements, as well as impacts and how to mitigate those, mostly from near shore or onshore influences, not from the water itself. So an analogous situation to what you're experiencing out at the seashore and in Tomales Bay. So most of these point and non-point sources that are impacting these animals are coming from the shore. And then the seven-gill cow shark, which is kind of the big kahuna of the bay. It's the apex predator that lives more or less year-round. We know the females migrate as well. They're a large, robust shark that feeds on a lot of other sharks, as well as herring and rays and other fish and marine mammals. And then their cousin, the six-gill cow shark, which is a deeper water species, but also comes up to the margins of the bays, probably to feed. And then we have several species of smooth hounds. So shark diversity in this region is huge. We have about 30 species that are either resident or visiting at any one time in these esteros. So high diversity as well as relatively high abundance now that a lot of these areas are being cleaned up because the San Francisco Bay used to be a highly polluted body of water with hundreds of millions of gallons of untreated sewage and industrial waste going into it. Thanks to a couple of women in the 1900s and starting Save the Bay and raising awareness and regulating through the Clean Water Act in the 70s, the San Francisco Bay is now a healthy ecosystem, relatively. I swim in it. It's much cleaner than it used to be, and it's now inhabited by many species of fish as well as marine mammals. And we're seeing a recolonization of many species of marine mammals now in the bay, including northern elephant seals that are starting to make their incursion again. Harbor seals are increasing, the harbor porpoises. We saw a gray whale in the bay a couple weeks ago, and humpback whales. So that's good for the San Francisco Bay, which has a nice deep mouth, but maybe not so much for Tomales Bay and Drake's that have narrow openings. but we still have many species of marine mammals and pinnipeds in those two esteros. And then there are other benthic sharks like the swell sharks and the horn sharks that are egg layers. And then there are the species that are also that come into the bay that are pelagic, are open water and migrate. So this is Dr. John McCosker at left, my hero and mentor, and Jared Huffman, Congressman, well, he was then Assemblyman Huffman at lower right, and they're helping us tag seven-gill sharks and look at their movements and look at their impacts to provide greater conservation of these species, in particular of this nursery habitat. So we have all of these elasmobranchs and marine mammals coming into the bay, giving birth, nurturing, leaving, and they're out there getting killed. Sometimes they're getting killed in the bay as well for sport or as bycatch in commercial fisheries. So I do have a background with the congressman, and I will be talking to him. I'd say we have a very good relationship, and I know where he stands on this, and I know why he has his stance on this, but hopefully he can change his stance a little bit and more in favor of the environment. So I really want to applaud all of you who have been working so hard on this National Seashore. A lot of my work is in Asia. Each summer, we try to combat the shark fin trade as well as illegal poaching. So I'm gone usually 3 months out of the year. Now with COVID, unlike everyone else, I'm planted in a chair in front of a computer, actually finishing a book on shark science for kids, but also a guide to elasmobranchs in this area that will be published hopefully fall. One of my other roles locally is working in our state marine protected areas. So I was a stakeholder in the north central region of the marine protected zone under the Marine Life Protection Act of 1999. There are 5 regions. The north central is the one we are in. Those red dots are state marine reserves or no-take reserves. The blue are state marine conservation areas. And then the yellow, which are the only ones in the bay, are actually marine recreation areas. So there's no true fishing regulation, no true no-take zones in the San Francisco Bay, which is actually Region 5 under the MLPA. So part of our role is to bring those red and blue, no bias, into the bay to increase protection for habitat, as well as some of these nurseries and gestation sites for many important species that include fish, sharks, herring, Dungeness crabs, salmon, and of course, marine mammals. So we work out at the Farallones every year when the white sharks come in, and we work in education as well. I lead public trips, do filmmaking like Skylar, that are primarily conservation films. And so included in this area that I chair with, or co-chair, I should say, with the state, is the Point Reyes SMR State Marine Reserve, which is a no-take zone there on the, I guess it would be the left side of your screen. And then the Drake's Estero Marine Conservation Area. So we were involved when I was with Tern on the whole National Seashore issue with the oyster company and trying to revert back to its wilderness status as it was intended. And now it looks like we're in stage 2 of that fight. So what I want to talk a little bit is just more about the water side and how it possibly we could apply some of the regulations in place towards leveraging or trying to support some of the land use work that you all are doing. I do have a background in public health. I work for the Santa Barbara County Environmental Health Services, assessing hazardous waste sites, doing water sampling. So I've worked with the State Regional Water Quality Control Board quite a bit, and as a public health officer, got involved sometimes in sewage spills too. So we were involved in water monitoring before I came up to the Bay Area, and also worked for the health department on campus at UC Berkeley for a while. So I do have a background. I have a master's in environmental health, which includes toxicology, but also human public health. But I really care about the environment more than people, and then people can just kind of come along with a healthier environment. So Drake's Bay has been an area that I've been really interested in. And it's an area of restoration now. We work with the National Seashore, who is doing monitoring of eelgrass and starting to restore some of these native seagrass beds. From what I've learned doing some of the research, it looks like Drake's Bay is not an impaired water body under the Clean Water Act, and it has been removed. Tomales Bay, however, has not, as you know. One of the most important things about these esteros is the high densities of this one seagrass, Zostera marina, which is actually a flowering plant. It's rhizomal also. It establishes its own ecosystems. It's a source of blue carbon sink, so it's a carbon sink. There's a lot of research going on in the bay by Dr. Kathy Boyer of EOS at Esperin Ocean Science Center of San Francisco State University. And there's been a lot of movement to try to increase these eelgrass beds. We've lost somewhere between 95 and 99% in the San Francisco Bay. Tomales Bay is doing much better, but at least half has been lost through runoff, through dredging, through fill, through other perturbations. But this plant, to me, is like the coral reef of our temperate water systems. It nurtures hundreds of species, invertebrates, vertebrates, important commercial species such as coho salmon, which take refuge in it, Dungeness crab, which is the only viable fishery, or was the only viable commercial fishery in the Bay Area, but before the wharf fire last week. But it's also important habitat for seabirds and marine mammals, and sharks love it. So I love seagrass because it is super important for egg laying, for the egg layers, for hatching young or pupping live young, and also these hosts of other species. So it is a protected species under the Clean Water Act. It's a species of interest on a federal list. If it is present in an area, it has to be considered in any kind of development plan, any kind of restoration plan. So it's a really important species for many reasons. We're also part of the National Marine Sanctuary in Tomales Bay under that expansion that Lynn Woolsey started, and that was increased under Mr. Huffman. And the sanctuary now manages not the Estero, but actually the Tomales Bay region, and they have their own regulations that protect discharge. So there is some language in there that you will not discharge into the sanctuary, which means sewage. What has not been tested is off-land discharge. But there have been some arguments. I'm not a lawyer. I did reach out to Jeff Miller with CBD to see what the determination was, because there have been exclusions in sanctuaries from water treatment plants that did not meet the clean water guidelines. Of course, all this might be moot if the president, as it is, removes these additional protections, and not only under the Clean Water Act, but the Endangered Species Act. But we'll hope that good people like y'all and other advocates will maintain these strong environmental regulations that have helped so much restoration and replenishment in our aquatic marine ecosystems. So Tomales Bay is considered an impaired water board. I think the following speaker will probably talk about this, about TMDLs and the maximum coliform counts, but the counts are pretty high, and it is an impaired water source because of fecal coliform, which comes not only from humans, but also from other mammals. Perhaps a better indicator is Enterococcus, which is really the bacillus that causes real illness. So fecal coliform is really an indicator, and this is some old data. It could come from cows, it could come from humans, it could come from raccoons, it could come from tule elk. So there are genetic methods of taking a fingerprint to see where that poop comes from. So if this has not been done, which I don't think it has, I haven't seen all the data, but you can fingerprint where this coliform comes from. If it's coming downstream from the dairies, you've got a pretty strong smoking gun there. So this is just what talks about under the Clean Water Act. There is a 5-year, as you know, conditional waiver that's due. I'm pretty sure it's 2023. I think the strategy would make sure this does not get renewed. Pretty important not to have a waiver to a Clean Water Act. So the other addition is that there are many endangered species in this area. This comes from the report that was done by Moss Landing Marine Lab, and in particular, coho salmon, red-legged frogs, of course, are in the seashore area, so species of high interest, as well as tidewater gobies, another aquatic species that is on the endangered species list and a list of California special concern. And of course, our marine mammals, which have been protected since the 70s, which use these habitats to forage, but also to give birth. I don't know what the direct impacts are from some of these off-site contaminants. I encourage you to talk to either Francis or Jeff at the Marine Mammal Center, and I could give them a call to see if they do have interest. Typically, they're not as political as many groups are, but they do have a direct interest, and this is part of their mission. So under the Marine Life Protected Act, there's also regulations on what you can and cannot do inside a protected area. In this case, this would be not Tomales Bay, but this would be in the Drake's Estero. This has never been tested, as far as I know, whether an offsite discharge going into the protected area, it might be worth a case. So finally, we have a citizen science program. We've been using an ROV, a remote operating vehicle, running it in Drake's Estero, as well as doing near shore observations, and we've expanded it into Tomales Bay, looking not only for live sharks like this, but for dead sharks that, for example, we've had several die-offs in the Bay Area over the past 2 decades. And we put that data in the iNaturalist database through the California Academy of Sciences. So you all could help with that, or get your kids to load up that app. And if they see a shark array, they can add that data point, and that will help us determine where the hot spots are for breeding or for feeding or nurturing. So finally, in our work to increase marine protection here in the Northeast Pacific, we are supporting the 5th California National Marine Sanctuary, connecting the Point Conception, the Big Sur coastline, to the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. That's now under review. If you go to our website at sharkstewards.org, you can add your voice. The public record is open until mid-June.